Elizabeth Renzetti's creed is feminism. As a columnist for the Global Mail, as a parent, as a keen witness of the human condition, she's watched the evolution of feminism and the role of women for more than 3 decades. And in Shrewed, a wry and closely observed look at the lives of women and girls, she tells it like it is, with wit, insight, humor, and a frank perspective. And she joins us now for more. Hi, Elizabeth.
Hi, Nan.
It's really nice to meet you.
I'm so glad to be here.
I was laughing out loud reading the essays.
Rolling, all right.
Yeah, and LOL. But I was also banging my head against the wall. How important is it to use humor in your writing when you're writing about serious issues?
I think it's extremely important for me. It's sort of the school of if I didn't laugh, I would cry, and I would just be in bed with the duvet over my head and how horrible everything is or can be. Also, there's just a way of approaching a subject, I think, if you do it through humor, that makes it more relatable for people. It's like a little door opening. You're not lecturing them and you're not hectoring them. And I think that actually kind of softens their brain. Makes me sound so Machiavellian. I'm just sliding in through humor. But it does make their brain more receptive, I think, to maybe what you're talking about, if you can make them laugh. Somebody described it as the spoonful of sugar method of writing. But it's really the only way I know how to write as well. So if I had another method of writing, I might use it, but I don't.
I think, in my personal opinion, I think it's really powerful.
Thank you.
It's your second book, but this is the first one where you're talking about your family, you're talking about personal issues in your life, your body parts. Was it scary to do that?
Yeah, it really was. It's actually quite hard, I find, as a journalist to write about yourself. So when I was in journalism school, in the 80s, you were told that writing about yourself was kind of cheap and vulgar, and you know, I was a forbidden word.
Or was it even considered journalism?
It wasn't even considered journalism, and that's changed a lot with the sort of advent of the personal essay, and people have realized that you know, your inner self is a perfectly good journalistic realm to explore, but I still find it uncomfortable. It's still hard for me to speak about personal things, but yeah, there's a lot of it in there from sort of family stuff, you know, buying bras, all kinds of things that when I wrote them, I just would think, I wouldn't think of the outside room. I'd just be in my little office, my cat's at my feet, and it would just be like me and my computer, nobody else is gonna read this, and that helped me to be able to write it.
But why did you want to present it this way?
Well, I think it's also, again, it's kind of the humor thing, which is that if people can see themselves in your writing, it strikes a chord, it becomes so resonant. And I find that in my journalism as well, and column writing, the columns I've written that were personal were probably the most resonant with readers. And I think it's because readers think, she's like me, or she's had experiences like me, I understand this. And it, as I say, journalism is frowned upon it a lot, but I also think that we have to realize that, you know, journalism isn't up here and readers are down here. For journalists to be, and journalism to be trusted, I think we have to realize that we're all on the same level. And when you speak personally from your heart or from your soul, from your personal experience, readers make that connection, and I think that's really important to do these days.
And it's an opportunity maybe for us to learn from one another.
Yeah, absolutely.
And since you're here, could I ask you to read something from?
Absolutely. Speaking of buying bras.
Yes, speaking of bras.
Yes. How does every woman not become a Marxist revolutionary when she realizes the ridiculous price attached to her gender? Earlier this year, I spent $500 on 6 bras, and not one of them is made from unicorn foreskin. Between them, they contain about as much material as a hand towel. Not one of them is the kind of majestic bra you'd find at Rigby and Peller, the London boutique that supplies underpinnings to the Queen, which I entered once and left almost immediately. So intimidated was I by the hushed and reverent atmosphere. I was an apostate in the temple of lingerie. Women's intimate apparel is a $32 billion global industry, according to the Lingerie Journal, whose slogan is lingerie news from top to bottom. There's no equivalent outlay for men's underpants, which, as we know, are bought in bulk by wives and mothers on their lunch breaks. There is no Victoria's Secret television special in which men parade down a runway in their dingy Y-fronts.
I'm impressed that there's a journal for lingerie, but it is a business.
Oh, well, think about it. I mean, if you think about what I quote Naomi Wolf in the book, and her book, The Beauty Myth, about the personal beauty quotient, I think it is, PBQ, how much extra money it costs to be a woman, which we take out of our own salaries. It's not like the government's giving you a tax break, you know, so that you can buy lingerie and bras, pantyhose, all the other things you need to be presentable in the world. And then, of course, the world also tells us that you have to look a specific way if you're going to be a professional woman. You have to be groomed, you have to be neat, you probably wear some kind of makeup. So all of these things cost a lot of money. And I'm not even talking about the women who put like hair vitamins on, who I mentioned in the book. Did you even know there were a thing called hair vitamins?
Apparently. I'm reading the wrong books
I know.
until this one.
Me too. Or, you know, if you get plastic surgery, that costs a whole other amount. But the other thing I was thinking about was it doesn't just cost money, right, to present ourselves as women in the world. It costs time. The other day I was trying to come up with some time to get a couple of things done. I had to have my roots colored and a couple of other things done. And, you know, I didn't have 3 hours. There was no 3 hours in that week for me to do this. And I thought, wow, my husband never sits around thinking, I need to find 3 hours to get my roots done. He goes in, he gets his hair cut, it takes 15 minutes, and he's back at work. So
I've also noticed that some department stores, they might have the men's section on the main floor, and then the women, you have to like do a bit of extra work to get there.
That's so interesting.
And it's like, I wonder why that is. But like when you started writing, you were in your 20s, and you write that when you started, it was a baked-in culture of sexism in the newsroom. Right. Has it changed?
Yes, I think it actually has changed a lot, and for the better. Absolutely. There's much more understanding of, I would say, like both micro and macro, right? So on one level, that our media outlets need to be composed of women, of people from different communities who make up our country. So people from racialized communities, LGBTQ people.
So it's more inclusive.
More inclusive, so that's one level. The other level is we realize we need to write about different topics and we need to include different voices. And
is that a way to survive, or is it because newspapers have come to realize that we have to do this?
I think newspapers realize that they have to come to do this, that people aren't going to read them if they don't see themselves reflected in it. Now, is it nirvana? No. I mean, like, we have a long way to go, and I've talked about this before, about how the major media outlets in Canada, both broadcast and print, do not have a lot of women in upper management and do not have a lot of women at the very top positions either. So I think that's a huge change that needs to happen. Hopefully it will happen in the next little while. But I think we're seeing a change in sort of coverage about the issues that are covered and the kind of people we quote in the stories as well. And in our newsroom, people make a concerted effort to try to reach out to different sources and experts, for example, when they're writing a story.
Well, there's a passage that I'd like to read from your book.
Yeah.
You write, and this is one of your first assignments. The bread plate had barely had a chance to circulate before I felt his hand on my thigh. No, I thought, no way. I was there to write about the dinner. I had my notepad in front of me. I could have stabbed him with my pen. Instead, I shifted slightly away, which seemed guaranteed to end the episode without bloodshed. I felt his hand slide deeper near my crotch. I looked over at his wife, who seemed oblivious. In fact, the groper seemed oblivious too, his bland face concentrating on the speaker as if his wandering hand was a creature entirely beyond his control. He was gaslighting me. When we speak about the Me2 movement, do you think that one of the roles that it's played is it's given us vocabulary, language about what happens to women in everyday situations when they are being harassed?
Yeah, absolutely. The term gaslighting, for example, which comes from a play that's now, I think, 80 years old and then was a movie. And now we understand it to mean that we know what's real, and we've been told for decades that it isn't real, that we're imagining it. So, for example, at that dinner, which was in New York City, it was a dinner for a famous author. I was there covering it as a reporter, and this man groped me. And I thought, this like this, am I imagining this? This can't be happening. And his face suggested, because he pretended he wasn't doing it.
And he was looking the other way, right?
He was like, yeah, and his wife was sitting on the other side. And so that was very clearly gaslighting. He was suggesting that, you know, this was not in fact happening. What I think is fascinating about the Me Too movement, and I'm so glad about it, is the way that I've had so many women reach out to me, older women, you know, through email often, because I write about these things, and they just want to share their stories. They don't necessarily want to be written about. They just want somebody to hear them. And they'll say, this happened to me. This happened to me 40 years ago, 50 years ago, 60 years ago when I was a young woman, and nobody listened. Or worse, I did tell somebody and nothing happened. And so I think to hear those voices and to have them feel validated that they were not crazy all this time, they were not imagining it, it had happened to a whole bunch of other women. So although they've had to live with that pain for a long time, they also now feel validated, that they know it was not all in their heads. And I think that's hugely important.
And this book, the catalyst for writing this book, I believe, was because Hillary Clinton didn't win the presidential election in 2016 in the US?
Yeah, that was the actual, well, I've been reporting on feminism for a long time, but the actual sort of, linchpin moment was the election of He Who Shall Not Be Named in November 2016, which I think took all of us by surprise. It certainly took me by surprise. I had written a very, I'd done reporting around the election, and I'd written a very long, turgid essay that day of the election saying how historic a female presidency was going to be for America, and filed it off to the Globe and Mail. And you have not read that essay because it did not see the light of day. And then about, it was like all of us, I was watching the little New York Times meter ticking ominously. And at a certain point, an editor phoned me late in the evening and said, do you want to maybe write about Donald Trump instead? And I said, no, because I'm really drunk. I actually was.
You were celebrating.
I was, no, I was drowning my sorrows because we realized.
Because by now you realized that she was okay.
And I had drunk the top bit of a bottle of scotch and went to bed, as we all did, I think, or many of us did, reeling, and many women did, reeling, because it seemed so implausible and wrong that this man had been elected to the most powerful office in the world, really. Not just as a misogynist, which we all know he is, not just somebody who'd been accused by multiple women of sexual assault, but he traded on those qualities and was valorized for those qualities. And it was like a blow to the gut for me, I think, and a lot of women, even though it wasn't our country, but, still an important force in our lives.
And also the possibility of Hillary Clinton becoming the first president was
gone, yes. Yeah. And, I had heard so many women in the States who I had talked to say, women, not men, say, well, I'd heard men say this too, but women were actually weirdly more forthright about it, tell me that she was a murderer, a liar, a demon. I had somebody tell me she was like a literal demon from hell. And this level of hatred and vitriol, which wasn't about her policies or about, anything really having to do with her platform, but was about her personally, just staggered me. And I had thought, like many feminists did, that we had reached this, not nirvana, but at least a good place. And I think we all realized at that point that we had taken a lot for granted.
Do you think, you hear about this divide with young and older feminists.
Yeah.
Do you think that played a role in that?
Well,
or does that even
in the
exist?
American election, I'm not sure what role it played in the American election, because I think actually a lot of young women were enthusiastic about her presidency. I do think in terms of like feminism in general, let's just talk about in North America, I think there are schisms definitely between older and younger feminists. I'm putting myself in the older camp. And I think we have a lot to learn from younger feminists. And I think I'm hoping we can embrace with humility what younger feminists bring to the table because it's so important. And also it's more their world now than it is my world. You know, they have a different interface with the world, and they have different connections to it, and they see the world differently. And for example, in the issue of inclusivity, it's young feminists who have been driving this idea that white feminism is a problem, which I believe it is, that the voices of white middle-class, able-bodied, straight women have been at the forefront of the movement, and other voices have been pushed to the side. And it's young feminists who have pointed out that this is problematic and are pushing for change.
I find it interesting though, because in your collection of essays, you are, you know, introspective. You reflect on your own role in this, and I think it's really difficult for people to do that. Where I know this word is reviled now. To check your own privilege. Yeah, the P word. It's the other P word.
I love the word privilege. I actually think it's really useful.
How did you get to that point, and why do you think it's useful?
Well, I think just a few years ago, I started listening to different voices and reading different things, and I realized that the feminism that I had grown up with, really in the 90s, was so what we called empowerment feminism at the time, which was like you can pole dance your way to liberation, and if you buy enough Manolo Blahniks, then you're
like, you know, Carrie Bradshaw.
Carrie Bradshaw, yeah. Then you're a strong, powerful woman. And it was very individual, and it wasn't necessarily about the systems that oppress women and the infrastructures that bring us down. And when we start to look at that, what are the systemic roots of oppression and dominance, you realize that people are weighed down more than you are as a white woman. I do have certain privileges that other people don't, like being middle class, and you know, I have a nice job, I get to live in this country, and you become blind to how fortunate you've been. And that good fortune has come to you through no kind of work of your own, but just because of the way you look and the networks you were brought up in. I'm actually kind of surprised that more people don't understand that or acknowledge it. It seems very clear to me that if you look a certain way, if you were born in a certain place, you started out with way more advantages than other people did.
Maybe it's because some people think that when you do say that, you're saying that they didn't earn it, and maybe makes them defensive.
Yeah, I think it does make them defensive. But what's wrong with being a bit defensive? I think you're right, though. People don't like to feel unsettled. They don't like to feel uncomfortable. And in this discussion we're having about white feminism, it is uncomfortable. And it makes me sometimes uncomfortable because I'm not sure what I should be saying or what I should be doing. And so I try to, like I say, read a lot. I try to listen a lot. I try to do the work myself so that other women don't have to do the work for me. But it's hard. And I understand why, as you say, people don't necessarily want to do it. But the movement's going to fall apart if we don't.
Another, I guess, word that might be a word that people don't really like talking about is ambition.
Right.
Have you ever found yourself in a situation where you did have to, I don't know, put limits on your own ambition, or other people put limits on your ambition?
Yeah, ambition's really interesting to me. To me, I look at my life like there's sort of this idea we tell young women that it's going to be like Mount Everest, like a little climb up Mount Everest. But that is not my experience at all. To me, it's more like a game of snakes and ladders. Like you go along for a while, climb a ladder, fall down a snake, ladder, snake, ladder, snake. And it is a series of ebbs and flows, ambition. And I also think we have a very constricted idea of ambition in the Western world.
What do you mean by that?
Well, I think, especially for women, so we talk about, you know, balance. And it's always about work and family. It's always about how you're doing at work and how you're doing in the family and like what goals you've met. But I think you can have a much broader sense of accomplishment in your own life, having to do with, let's say, relationships or volunteering or your hobbies or really anything. And it doesn't, we measure status so oddly, and I think in such a narrow, restricting and crippling way. Status has to do with, you know, how much money you make and like how much you own and all these other things.
Or even how, if you have children or not.
Or even if you have children or not. This is the other thing. And women are, if you don't have children, then, well, what does that say about you? But why? Why can you not have a full life that's outside of these things or is measured in different ways? So I think ambition is really interesting to me to look at. And I think it's unfair to place too many burdens on young people, especially young women, about how they should live their lives and how their success should be measured.
Because there were moments in your life when you were going on
that. I was a total failure all the time, yes.
I'm doubtful. That is the other, that's the voice in your head, isn't it?
Yeah, well, that's partly.
That was one of my favorite essays, and it opens the book up, and you talk about this voice, you call it the a-hole, well, not the a-hole, but you know, we can't say that on TV.
We can't say that on TV.
Yeah, in your head,
right.
And this voice that's always trying to, when you're going up, and it's like, oh no, you can't, you know.
Yeah.
Is that another way of saying like the imposter syndrome, or?
Yes, and a whole bunch of academic research has shown that women suffer more from the imposter syndrome.
Why is that?
I'm not entirely sure. I would think it probably has to do with the way that we are socialized to be helpmates, to be peacemakers, to be the people who are behind the scenes and not necessarily in front of the scenes, and to be to diminish ourselves, our appetites, our ambitions and things, and not to ask for a lot, because asking for a lot is seen as, in many ways, if you look at it through a traditional lens, unfeminine, right? Why would you be so, you know, greedy for whatever, love, food, anything? So the voice in your head tells you, don't even try. Don't even try. You'll be much safer if you don't even try. And women are, young women especially, I think, are often afraid of failure. And you see that in like magazines that are aimed at girls. They're always about humiliation, public humiliation, like I fell down or I tripped or, you know, something humiliating happened to me and people laughed at me. So all of those things conspire with the voice in your head, which is your internal critic, to tell you not even to try, and that it's not worth trying. It's not worth the pain of failure to try.
And so you shrink yourself, which is something that you talk about as well.
Yeah, you become small, you're not as loud, you don't laugh as much, you don't order a steak on the first date, you know, you just, all of these things, you try to take up a much smaller place in the world. And as I also say in the book, it's understandable because in many ways, women are, you know, we're prey animals in a certain way. You do get preyed upon. You know, physically, you can be the subject of, you know, abuse or assault or something like that. And also online. Yeah. The target of trolls and a-holes, if we're allowed to say that. So you learn to take up a smaller place, a smaller footprint, because that makes you safer. And it's really unfortunate. And what happens online is hugely unfortunate because women are often driven off public digital spaces, social media platforms, because of people who say hateful things to them. And if you're not the victim of that hateful speech, you don't really understand how wearying it is, how exhausting it is to fight it all the time and to put up with it. So it does just become easier to walk away.
Yeah. We only have a few minutes left, but I really wanted to ask you this question. You were quoted in Chalet magazine as saying, "I think we're very bad at teaching boys to be complete human beings. I worry a lot about boys, even more than I do about girls in some cases." Yeah. What do you mean by that?
Well, I defer to the great American feminist Bell Hooks in this, who says, Bell Hooks says, patriarchy has no gender. And she says, patriarchy will not heal boys. If it were so, they would all be well. And I think when you think about that, you realize what has happened, I think, is that we have been very bad at teaching boys to become complete human beings in the sense of being in touch with the full realm of their emotions and hopes and dreams and ambitions. So we teach them that, you know, status is equated to dominance and acquisitiveness and power and all of these other things. We're much better at teaching girls and young women to get in touch with their traditionally masculine traits like competitiveness and you know, courage and all these things, and much less good at teaching boys to be in touch with the traditionally feminine, what we consider feminine qualities. So I think things like kindness or tolerance or compassion or creativity, these things. And until we teach boys that they can be these complete human beings without mockery, without fear, that these are also valued traits, I think we're still going to be living in a world that's quite poisonous.
And now that the book is out and people know a bit more about your life, how are you feeling?
Oh, as a feminist? Well, I think it's a really good time to be a feminist, actually. I'm quite happy that we're seeing a real groundswell, I think, of activity, and people are much more conscious of the movement. And yeah, I'm happy to be an old lady feminist.
Medium old.
Medium old, that's me.
Elizabeth, thank you so much for being here. The book is funny. It's a very important read. And I also really admire the fact that you take the time to mentor young girls. I've never had a mentor, so that's incredible that you do that.
It is really important to have a mentor and a mentee.
Yeah. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Nam.
The Agenda with Steve Bacon is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario, helping businesses stay on the right side of change with strategic thinking, insightful decisions, and business leadership. Are you on the right side of change? Ask an Ontario CPA.